Hello, LinkedIn Live. I think this is our third LinkedIn Live, Lori. How exciting.
Yes, very exciting.
Yeah. Looking forward to having a conversation with Lori here today on continuous improvement and the importance of continuous improvement. Before we get started, my name is Jared Hackbart. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing here at Brilliance. I've been with Brilliance for 5 years. It's been a great 5 years, and I think I shared in my last LinkedIn Live that I really enjoy being on Brilliance's team, specifically because I get to work with so many different organizations who are looking at how they can leverage digital to drive additional growth for their business. And it's been a fun 5 years. So I'm looking forward to this topic because I think it's one that is not only important, but one we have frequently with clients. And I'll let Lori go ahead and do her intro from here.
Yes, it is a fun conversation because, this is fun work because we get to help businesses improve themselves and improve ourselves along the way, too. So, yes, I'm Lori McDonald. I started Brilliance a little bit more than 20 years ago, back in 1998. I went to Purdue in computer electrical engineering and ended up through an internship at NASA Johnson Space Center, where I eventually worked as a flight controller for the space shuttle program. A really exciting and fun experience. I ended up meeting my husband there. He eventually went to work for Rockwell Automation. And through that, we ended up relocating to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, when he had a promotion to Rockwell's headquarters, where he managed their largest data warehouse with their distributors. And so we ended up in Milwaukee in 1998, and I was trying to figure out what could be as cool as space. And I decided to start a web development company, and found that we were kind of uniquely equipped to work with manufacturers and distributors, helping them to implement digital commerce. And my husband left his job at Rockwell 9 years ago, and now he leads our development team. And we've grown. We made the Inc. 5000 list last year. Thanks, Jared, for your leadership in that. And it's been a really exciting journey along the way. And so one of we have several company values that kind of speak to the idea of continuous improvement. We're driven is one of our values, and we're learners. And it's really interesting to me. One of the things that we have a customer advisory board. And one of the things that I've noticed is that for manufacturers and distributors who are really growing right now, this is an area of commonality. Something that we share is this idea of continuous improvement. So I'm really excited to talk about it today.
Completely agree. So we are still testing out LinkedIn Live. I'm going to throw a couple curveballs out there for our audience that's in live attendance. First of all, if you are joining us live, we'd love to hear who's here and where you're from. So punch it in the chat box if you feel comfortable doing so. Also, if you have feedback for us around how LinkedIn Live has worked and what you're seeing on your end, very interested in hearing that as well. And hopefully the content that we provide here today will be payback or good enough in return. So the last housekeeping item I'll mention is also, if you have a moment and you're interested in additional content that we're producing, give us a follow on our LinkedIn page. All right, let's jump into it. So the importance of continuous improvement, this has various names within our organization. Lori, you listed off some of our core values that really speak to, different areas in which we're constantly leveraging continuous improvement. Today, I think we're really looking to have a conversation around, some would call it support, some would call it customer success. For the purpose of today's conversation, we're calling it continuous improvement. And as we dive into it, we look at it in two different ways, and specifically from a proactive and a reactive perspective. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say. I'd start with, when it comes to reactive, I'll start there. I feel like reactive gets a negative connotation associated with it in many ways. I feel like there's lots of content around there about how you want to be an organization that isn't reactive to situations, that you're proactively pursuing opportunity to improve your organization or catch something before it happens that could negatively impact you from a digital perspective. But yeah, I'm curious what you have to say about proactive versus reactive.
Yeah, it is interesting because when we think about customers and that have their websites, like reactive is obviously the thing that people need know they in some sense like they need like if a customer is having an issue on your website, you need to address it, right? Those are the things you have to do. Um, and yet, in some ways, to your point, Jared, a lot of times being reactive has a kind of a negative connotation, like as like we're only reacting to what's happening. But certainly, you want to have systems and processes set up that enable you to be responsive and handle quickly anything that might crop up for customers on your site. So I think it's definitely true that you want to think through how you can ensure you're ready to react and respond and be prepared to continue to support anything that might crop up for your customers as they're engaging with you. And yeah, I think that where you can get in trouble with being reactive is if you don't take it to the next step, and you are also like you want to combine being reactive with also being proactive about how to create more value and how to as we're talking about continuously improve, how to get better. And so if you get stuck in being reactive, I think that's the danger.
Perfect.
I'm curious too. I don't know who we have out there in our audience, but it's certainly if there are any thoughts they have for us in this proactive versus reactive, or where they spend their time. Sometimes I think it's interesting that I know, Jared, you and I have both spent exercises where we try and like block off our calendar, or I don't know, block off our calendar, or track where we're spending our time. I think when we think about proactive versus reactive, thinking about like what types of things are you spending your time on? Are you spending your time on both with respect to your website and with respect to your business in general? Are you spending your time on things that you're reacting to, things that are happening, and are you spending time that are kind of proactively related to your strategic goals?
Yeah. So there's clearly importance around being reactive on the continuous improvement, to your point around the idea of fixing bug issues or anything else. Something breaks, you obviously want to react and fix that. But I think for the next part of our conversation here, we really want to be diving into the proactive side and how, specific to the digital space, you can be leveraging data to support that.
Yeah.
Do you want to start with, I know you and I were talking about pretty recently here, organizations as they're looking at their business, they're looking at their digital presence, what's important to them in terms of KPI for the website. Is it generating a lead? Is it generating an order? And having that thought in mind, how can you be proactive around supporting that initiative?
Yeah, I think it is really interesting. I see we have a comment around being proactive means you need to have some kind of plan, which is definitely true. And I think it's interesting, Jared, to your point around like data and measurements. Like, how are we going to what things are we going to look at to learn from as we look to be proactive, and thinking about what those KPIs are that you measure yourself on. I think because we work in the B2B e-commerce space, and so in B2B digital, it can be interesting. Like the things that you measure can drive how where your focus is and how you choose to improve. Um, if you're measuring orders on your website or leads, that puts your focus in a very specific place. You could be measuring, instead of measuring digital orders, you could be measuring overall orders for your organization and customer satisfaction related to your digital site, so that like regardless of where a customer places an order, the idea is really that your digital presence is supporting your customers, and they're finding value in it, even if in the end they end up picking up the phone to place that order. So thinking about how do you want to measure success, and what does that look like for you to gauge like how you're improving over time?
Absolutely. Another part of that conversation we were having was around the idea of transitioning from a project to continuous improvement. I think often we find ourselves having conversations with organizations who, specific in our space, B2B e-commerce, who put all this time and energy, invest a lot of effort into the project itself, and then it's done, and they're like, all right, cross it off the list, it's done, we can move on forward. We I won't say hate's a terrible word to use to explain, but we do not love that mindset, because digital is such a fast moving industry. There's things changing constantly. We're looking at how can you embrace the ideology of continuous improvement and the fact that you need a support plan to continue to improve upon what you've built.
Yeah. Yes. And there are so many things there. I think the reality is that we all have a tendency to want to check something off and be done with it, because, projects, work takes time, it takes investment, it takes thought, and you want to celebrate and focus and move on to something else. But the reality is, when we think about the work that we do in digital and the work that our customers are doing with their digital presence, your larger competitors that are really growing and the most successful companies in digital, like, they don't take a day off in terms of what they're doing, in terms of how they're continuously improving. And so, really you can't either. And you want now, there are different size companies, you'll have different amounts of resources, but in some aspect, you want to ensure that you've got some ongoing process to continue to learn from what's happening on your site and improve on it. So the idea that you would, and Jared, what you're referencing is, a lot of times we'll talk to companies who are looking to, make an update to their site, and then they'll be okay. Then they kind of consider themselves good until, a year and a half from now, when they're going to choose to, or, whatever, they're going to choose to come back and make the next update. And that's just a real missed opportunity from a competitive standpoint. There's so much that you can learn and drive more value for your customers, and really more revenue, more profit for your business by taking a more iterative approach.
Absolutely. I can think of like 100 examples in my head, specific to internal examples that I'm like, oh, I need to do that later today. But I reflect on this as I was reflecting on this topic, you and I had a meeting earlier this week with the MJW group, which, I'll punch it in the chat box here shortly. For those who aren't familiar with them, I'd recommend looking at the organization. They do some really great work specific to this topic. Continuous improvement is really their bag. And part of the conversation I found fascinating is, a lot of what we're talking about comes back to, preparation, asking the right questions, making sure that you have the comment that was in place, making sure you have this plan in place,
right,
so that you don't find yourself midway through a project with a stuck that delays the project, adds additional costs by, weeks, months, sometimes. I think we have seen it happen in numerous occasions, and we're always thinking through, how can we be supporting these organizations that find themselves in these spots? And I think it really comes back to ensuring that you invested the time to ensure that you have a good process in place, and that you're using that process to drive your decisions in this process moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. I remember one of the things that Jennifer and Marcus talked to us from the MJW group talked to us about was the idea of having, being clear on your current state and your future state. Like, where are you? Where do you want to be? And then using that, like, when we talk about continuous improvement, that's really helpful for us to identify where we are, where are we headed, so that we can keep ourselves, measure ourselves against where we want to go. Yeah, and the other thing I've been thinking about a lot, I've been reading the book Experimentation Works. It was recommended through Alex Atzberger, a CEO of Optimizely, is reading. I know they read it as a part of the when Episerver acquired Optimizely as a team, they were reading it. And one of the ideas in there is this idea that the power of incremental changes. When we think about thinking like a scientist about our business and making hypotheses, having measurements. And one of the things that was really interesting to me in that book is that we oftentimes think it needs to be like this really big change that we make. We come up with this great idea, but there's a lot of power in many small changes that can be really beneficial to an organization and drive powerful results. So just thinking about that idea of the great results that we can see through a lot of small improvements. Back to the idea of continuous improvement.
All right. So now that we were kind of all over the place, I'd say on David's
all right.
We'll focus.
I'll focus.
It was in the ballpark. But another important facet to these conversations that we're having around continuous improvement, really ultimately, and I feel like a lot of this always comes back to communication, but really the idea of setting and managing expectations.
Yeah.
Not only managing expectations, but setting these expectations early in your relationship and whatever it is that you're working on. What are some things, Lori, that you'd say you'd be recommending to an organization for what they should expect as far as how a relationship would work with a systems implementer in terms of expectations at the beginning of a project?
Yeah, well, and I think, yes. So things that you should have as expectations for whoever you're working with. A single point of contact is a great expectation to have. Like, who's going to be the person that you reach out to, that it will be the person that will communicate with you, that you can get answers from about what's happening. Easy ways to ask for what you want, to communicate with them, to send in inquiries, to have a tracking system in place that enables you to prioritize those, to have really clear reporting on what's being worked on, what's been done, what's about to be worked on, how much time it's taking. So really, when you think about like good communication and systems as a part of that, and also around that, like the quality of actually that personal communication, like how quickly are people getting back to you? Like, getting back to people within a business day, and making sure there are tools that track that. And then, knowing that the team you're working with has experience working with the solution that you have, like that they have expertise in the work that they're doing for you. I think those are all things that you should expect and look for. And I see we've got some comments from Josh that I really appreciate that. I know one of the things I saw in here was, continuous improvement comes in 1,000 ways. So picking priorities can be tough. Which I definitely think is true when time for staff is limited, which is so true. And I think that's the challenge for so many organizations. They have more work on their plate than they can keep up with, and so like that prioritization can be important. And your other note here, Jennifer, on collaboration being key. I think that's also really, that's one of the ways that, I think ideally as a team, we're able to collaboratively work with our clients to help them figure out what the right priorities are, or help them to collaborate internally as a team, making sure that we have a good understanding of where they're trying to go, in a way that enables them to leverage whatever resources they have in the best way possible.
So outside of setting expectations, I'm going to touch on another core value, and it's a core value of Brilliance actually pretty recently, I think within the last year. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lori.
Last 2 years, I think, but yeah.
Wow, it's already been 2 years. But we made it a core value for a very good reason, because I think it not only reflects how we want to operate internally, but how we want to manage our relationships with our clients. And it comes back to this idea of healthy conflict. So we believe in the idea of voicing dissenting opinions.
Yeah.
Because it results in better decision making ultimately, for whether it's a leadership meeting, marketing sales team meeting, any meetings that we're having as an organization. Anytime there's that level of positive conflict, you usually end up with a better result. And so we have really been pushing ourselves to have that same level of healthy conflict that we have internally with our customers.
Yep.
And I think it's been a really positive thing for us, because it leads to, there are times where we've experienced things that a customer might come to us and say, I want to do this, and we know it's a bad idea. We've gone through it, and we will use that opportunity to positively challenge or have some healthy conflict to hopefully help them understand how they could potentially approach it differently or why it's a bad decision at that point in time.
Yeah.
You think of other instances in which healthy conflict is a positive thing in terms of managing expectations?
Well, I think healthy conflict is a really important thing. I think there's a fair amount of research out there around, the ideas of like confirmation bias. We look for evidence that what we think is a good idea is a good idea. And in general, if we don't create an environment that makes it safe for people to disagree with us, we'll just head on the path we're on. And that can be, that's true for us at Brilliance. That can be true for our customers. It's true for all of us, like as humans. And so it's really good for us to think about, in order to continuously improve, we need to kind of have an openness and a humility that like the thing we think might be best, like we might be wrong. And what's really interesting to me about healthy conflict is that sometimes it's not even as clear as like right and wrong. Often it's more nuanced than that. Like often when I may have an idea and people on my team disagree with me, and often what ends up happening is we do something that might be similar to what I was originally thinking, but a little different. Or maybe it's the same thing I had planned, but we execute on it differently than what I was thinking. Like it's not exactly the way I pictured it, but it's better. And those things happen because of that healthy conflict. And when I think about with our clients, sometimes it's not necessarily that we're certain our customer's wrong, but we see some potential issues. And I think sometimes there's a danger in, as a vendor, you may want to just like do what you're asked, which is definitely like we do certainly want to be supportive, but also we have a responsibility in order to help them create the best solution to like give them like our perspective on like, well, have you thought of this? Like maybe we see a potential risk here. And, we've heard from clients, we had Chris Dobroth on an Exploration Tech a while back. And one of the things that he talked about was that he really valued the fact that if he asked our team to do something that we thought maybe wasn't a good idea, we would tell him, right? And so that's, I think that's something that you should look for in the vendor that you work with, whether that's an external vendor or your internal team. I think that's something important.
Absolutely. And I think doing it early and often sets a really good roadmap, a good foundation for the relationship then moving forward. You soon then find yourself forgetting that it's, I think there are times where it can be a little uncomfortable. I'm sure you've experienced where you've come with one of your many ideas to a team and maybe been a little bit uncomfortable with sharing that idea in terms of you knew that it might lead to some change or some healthy conflict. I certainly have experienced that. Yeah, but once you get into that rhythm, it's like you soon forget. You lose that, I guess. It's that practice makes perfect type methodology. But I think this is a perfect segue into the internal team side of things and sharing, what we've learned and how internal teams can be leveraging some of these ideas to continue to improve their support or their continuous improvement processes. Yeah. And the conflict is definitely one of those.
Yep. Definitely. And healthy conflict is something that takes work. I mean, you were referencing it, Jared, but it takes practice I'm someone who naturally isn't super comfortable with conflict. So it's something I had to teach myself to get more comfortable with, to kind of celebrate it when it happens, because it can feel kind of icky when you're in a meeting and people are disagreeing with each other. You and I were talking about this the other day, when you're in a meeting and that's how the meeting ends, is people all disagreeing with each other. Then it's like, oh, that didn't feel really good. But like to be able to come back and say that actually was a good thing. Like we're thankful that disagreement is happening, because we know that helps us to get better. So to kind of create a recognition, to kind of normalize within your team when we're disagreeing with each other, that's a healthy thing for us. That's helping us to get better as a team and celebrating that. I think that's a really good thing to nurture with an internal team, with the people that you work with around you. In your personal life too, I would say, but yes, we're talking about work. So, so yeah, I think that's a really good thing to nurture is healthy conflict for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that we have experienced internally in as far as managing and setting expectations for our team is the idea of managing a schedule and the workload associated with it, and making sure that it aligns with continuous improvement. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes. So, and Josh, I think this might relate something back to what you were saying, but certainly we see this with many of our customers, and we experience this at Brilliance. I mean, Jared, you were saying this. This is one of the one of the challenges that can exist is you have too many ideas. This can be my problem. I have 100 ideas, and when you try and do all of them, you don't get super far. And not only that, like, so maybe you don't have 100 ideas, like maybe, or maybe you've done a good job of prioritizing your ideas. Often, even in that, we have teams that are overworked that have many different responsibilities internally. So if you have an internal team that's supporting your website, that likely may not be their only job. Like they may also be supporting your internal network, or they may also be supporting, other functions within your organization. And so really thinking about, like, when we have challenges in terms of being able to do the things that we're trying to do from a continuous improvement perspective, one reason that can happen is that we're not giving people enough time to spend on it. So I think, one of the things that we've reflected on internally for us is, like, how do we, in some cases we've worked to, like, block off time for people. We've talked internally about reducing the number of things we're working on at any given time, or really trying to focus. We look at what things should we not be doing right now, so that we can ensure this thing gets done. So those are really, and it does in some sense come back to healthy conflict too, I would say, in a sense, because when you have someone that has too much on their plate, like, they need to be able to voice, there's no way I'm going to get all this done. Like, we need to make some decisions, because this isn't all going to happen with the way it's laid out currently.
Yeah, we've all experienced decisions being kicked down the road because of exactly what you spoke to.
Yeah.
Another item or an idea, maybe it's not so much an idea, but something that we've seen lead to successful internal teams with continuous improvement comes back to the idea of experience, which I know we referenced earlier in terms of, hiring people who understand the platform and the solution. Would you say that applies to internal teams as well? Outside of the idea of, obviously, if you're working on a project, you want to hire someone who has experience on whatever platform you're working on, but maybe more so from the idea of having the right experience in place to support the last two topics that we hit around healthy conflicts and challenging schedules.
Yeah, I think so. Experience is a really interesting thing. I think it can be helpful to have someone who's had experience in doing those things, but it's not. And I think, Jared, you and I have talked about this before. In some cases, you will have people on your team who don't have the experience, who haven't done it before, but who have a willingness to learn, and who have and so, like, I think when we think about, like, healthy conflict and managing schedules, those are things that there are ways to learn how to do that better. And it also comes back to the idea of continuous improvement. So in some ways, for us to be doing a good job at continuously improving our digital sites, in some cases it means I think in all cases, maybe it also means we're continuously working on improving ourselves, like improving how we collaborate, improving how we define our goals, how we prioritize, how we manage our schedule, and identifying where the gaps in my personal skill set, or in the skill set of my team, inviting people to do that self-reflection so we can get better. I think if you can find people who have experience in doing those things, it's that much more of an advantage to your team on the whole.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our third LinkedIn Live. I'd welcome anyone in the audience to provide us feedback on just general, but also your experience with LinkedIn Live as well. Appreciate everyone taking time to join us, and we hope you have a great day. Anything you'd add, Lori?
I love the topic. I just get so here's what I would end with. I think what's exciting to me about the idea of continuously improving is that, like, even though we all, like, I have a vision for where I think about like brilliance is headed, and I'm sure for our customers they have a vision for where they're headed. The reality is you can end up someplace even better than you might have imagined, through this like collaboration with your team, with your outside vendors, and through like continuously improving. I just think it's really exciting to realize that like something more than you envisioned is possible. So yeah, that's what I would close this with.
Perfect. Better note than mine. Thanks, everybody.